So now I want to show you all displacement. Let's turn transmission off. We can turn roughness all the way up for this one because we're not going to worry about roughness for this. We just want to see displacement and how it can affect an object. All right. So I'm going to hit Tab, File, Texture, and let's use the rock height that we made from our tiling class that we did in Photoshop. All right, so we've got this rock height, which is a black and white image. So we talked about this before with height maps, that black values will cause it to recess, cause it to go in, and white values will cause it to pop out. And it's kind of confusing that they're called height maps. And then when you bring it into Maya, there's not actually a height input. You have two options with a height map. It's either put it into displacement or put it into bump. And the bump mapping, it's still used, but honestly, it's very old technology. Bump mapping has been around, I don't even know how long, but since the earliest iterations of Maya, it's just very, very old school. So essentially, bump mapping will fake shadows onto a geometry surface. So it'll fake details that are not really there and it'll give shadows. So it's a step below normal maps because it'll give shadows, whereas a normal map will give both highlight and shadows. And then we go up another level to displacement, and displacement actually will deform the surface of geometry. It will affect the true geometry. And so let's just make sure that that's connected. So let me show you bump mapping really quick. So we'll do a bump 2D. And we'll plug that into our bump value. And then we just leave it at default, use as bump. This is where I've told you before to turn it to tangent space normals. But this is a black and white map, so we want to use this as bump. So let me just scroll down to geometry and plug that into our bump mapping, which is the same place that the normal map goes. All right, and now it's working. So it was just a color space setting. Okay, so as a bump map, it works pretty fairly. I'd say it's okay. If this were a normal map, we'd additionally get little highlights anywhere that the mesh is protruding. But if we look at the edge of the geometry, we can see that it's not actually affecting the geometry. It's only affecting any interior faces and just giving us a fake of a rock look. So let's disconnect that. And now let's connect this same map into the displacement. So displacement does not actually get put into the shader. It gets put into the shader group. If you remember when I was talking about shaders and shader groups, the shader group is what actually assigns the shader to the geometry. This is why we plug the displacement into the shader group, is because the displacement affects the geometry. So we want to just middle mouse drag that into displacement material. And it's going to make the connection that you need. It's going to make this displacement shader. So in every production I've ever worked on, we do not touch these values. These ones stay static and we make our adjustments elsewhere to the displacement itself. So if you need to turn your displacement up or down, this is not the place to do it. All right, so let's take a look at our beauty. It's not so beautiful, but it is working. And I'm going to turn my settings back down again because we're just waiting for this higher res render, which we don't need. Okay. All right, so right away we can tell just by looking at this that yes, indeed, it is affecting the geometry because it's got this very jaggedy line happening on the outside. Now, with displacement, it's very important to note that not only do you need to plug the displacement texture, the height map, into the shader group, you also need to turn displacement on for the object. And let's take a look here. Close this one out. We don't need the UV window open. All right. All right, so we want to go to the Arnold menu of the shape. So we just go to that drop down and come down to subdivision. So right now, and I'm going to make sure my render is paused. So it is, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click this little camera icon down here. So this is going to allow me to store a snapshot. This is super handy. Anytime you make a change to something and you're starting to make adjustments and you want to see, well, what did that actually do? Store a snapshot and then make a change. And then you're going to be able to compare between the two. All right, so I've stored my snapshot and now I'm going to go into my subdivision. Make sure your geometry is selected. And right now it says subdivision type, none. We want to turn that to Cat Clark. Now it's going to have just default settings of 1.0 with a bounds padding of 0. We can go ahead and render that and see what that does. All right, so overall, the size did not change too much. Depending on the geometry, you could see it might look really, really broken before you turn it to Cat Clark. Like I had a student that plugged in displacement to the character's eyes but didn't turn it on in subdivision. And so the eyes squared out completely. Like they essentially just turned into squares. And it was simply from not turning it on in subdivision. But we can see that it has made changes to it. Let's go ahead and store this one as well. So now we can right click on our snapshots, right click, set as A, right click, set as B. So now you can like toggle between the two to see what your changes are. So you can do this kind of like windshield wiper thing back and forth. You can do it across the middle where you do more of a solid wipe. You can do it from the bottom. You do have to disable these before you can render again. So you just right click, clear A, right click, clear B. And so now we need to figure out, all right, what settings should it be? Let's turn the height down to 0.1. All right, and let's render it. Okay, it's a lot more subtle. We can still see that it's affecting the edge here, but we also need to set the bounds padding. They made a really nice update with, I think it was with Maya 2022, if I'm not mistaken. But when you do a render, so as soon as you set your height value and then you render, it's going to give you a warning and it'll tell you what the padding needs to be. So here, it's really small, but it says basically it's telling me that padding is way too small and it needs to have a value of 0.06899, blah, 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 blah. 0.068 is fine. Essentially, this is going to be based on the scale of your object and the amount of your height. So if you start to mess with your height more, you're going to have to change your bounds padding again. Think of bounds padding as like an invisible envelope around your object. So it tells it when to start clipping out the displacement. If you saw a moment ago, let's pull this one back up. See how it's flattening out up here? A very like planar effect. So if we had the displacement set even higher, it would eventually turn into a square, and it's squaring out because of the bounds padding. It's going beyond the bounds padding clip range, and so it clips it out and it just turns it into a square. So that's what this bounds padding does. It essentially gives it an invisible envelope around the entire object to be able to properly render. All right, let's turn this one back up to, maybe let's try 0.5. It's going to tell me again what my bounce padding needs to be. So now it needs to be 0.354. So yeah, this is a really nice update because it tells you exactly what it needs to be. It used to be, had to just kind of figure it out on your own. 354. All right. So now I want to illustrate the dangers of displacement. It sounds so intense that way, but in animation, so let's duplicate this. All right, and let's place these two spheres next to each other. This is a duplicate of the first one, which has all of the settings. So I don't really need to make any changes to it. It inherited all of the displacement information. It inherited the shader. So it should all be good to go. But now I want to show you how, okay, in viewport, these two spheres are just barely touching. Let's render that. So now you can see what displacement is actually doing. The displacement is inflating these two spheres. So this is why I say displacement can be dangerous, because when an animator is working on a scene, they don't see this. They see this. They don't know that something might be growing or shrinking from displacement. So this has to be used with caution. For your personal projects, do whatever. It doesn't matter really. We don't have to really consider what might happen during animation. But in production, this is something that very much has to be considered. I don't even know how many times we've had to fix things because there was like a character animated with a hand on something. And then when it came time to render, whatever their hand was touching then enveloped their hand completely because it inflated due to the displacement. The opposite can happen. It can deflate if the displacement map is actually darker. So if we take a look at that, let's pause that again. And we take a look at this. Just going to disable the displacement map, just delete that there. And we take a look at the color ranges of these. So there's a fair amount of contrast in these maps, but essentially it's going from black to white. If you have something that's on the darker side, that's very much more black, it could get to the point where the mesh is actually shrinking. I had something break once where there's a shift that can happen with certain renderers where it actually has to shift up in value, otherwise the mesh will crash in on itself. And I was working on this kind of demon thing for American Horror Stories, and the displacement broke and it shriveled the demon into itself and like crushed it in around its eyes, and it looked like some sort of horrifying desiccated monkey thing. And we were all like, oh my gosh, that's terrible. It's a horror show, but not that bad. So it's very important that you check the settings and check your maps. So the map is also going to drive how much effect the displacement has. So if this map were more just grayscale, if it didn't have these extreme lows and highs in the values, you would actually need a higher amount in the displacement setting itself. So that value where I have it at 0.5, it would actually need to be quite a bit higher in order to get the same effect. So when I get asked, well, what value should I put my displacement setting at? Well, frankly, I don't know, because it's also dependent on the contrast amount of the map. So these are two factors where something in the same scene might have vastly different displacement amounts just due to the map that is controlling them. And it's also important to note that scale matters. So this is another thing where I was talking about, it's always important to scale your asset first before doing all of this shader development. This is yet another reason. The displacement amount, the need that it would have for how much displacement it should get will change when the asset is really big. So the dinosaurs that I worked on for Jurassic World, they were huge. And so they had values of like 30, 35, 40, really, really high value. You put that on something this small and it's just going to absolutely explode. Let's even put it at 10. Oh, I disconnected it. That's right. Let's plug that back in. There we go. So this is an example of the bounds padding not being enough. It has now gone completely square because the bounds padding is clipping it down. So right now, it has a recommended bounds padding of 7.12. So we'd have to click on that object again and change it here. So it's like, it's huge. It's really spiking out. It's completely enveloped that other sphere. So it's pretty sensitive, but you can see how powerful it is. You can actually change the surface of geometry using displacement. So displacement is great for rocks, for scales, for small details, but for certain things, a lot of times normal maps work just as well and don't take as much to render as displacement does.